Well, it's not fair.
Oh. That's not fair for Flair.
No, it's... let's start a campaign.
Not fair for Flair.
With that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to action.
Everybody, not
the
fair
Anvil
for Flair.
Jim Neidhart squaring off against the Mallet.
Not fair for Flair.
Get ready! You're talking to the Rolex-wearing, diamond-ring-wearing, gift-stealing, wheeling-dealing, limousine black, jet flyer, none of a gun, and I'm having a hard time holding these alligators down.
Well, hello everyone, and you're listening to a new little mini-series here called Fair to Flair. I'm Parv. I'm here with the one and only Marty Sleaze, aka the Teen Titan. How you doing, Marty?
I am doing excellent. Very looking forward to talking about Ric Flair. I don't think I've ever been this excited for a podcast. No offense, Kelly, if you're listening.
Well, just to explain what I want to do, I'm only going to do a few shows on this. I'd say 3 or 4 shows. I've planned 4, okay? But I'm not promising anything. Marty's my guest today. I'm going to have a different guest each time. And really, I have to say, Marty, I've become a little bit, I don't want to say grouchy, but a little bit fed up of my darling Ric Flair being subject to endless lazy criticisms, okay? So I do have a bit of an agenda for this little mini-series here, because I do think that certain aspects of what Ric Flair does are taken for granted, okay? And today we're going to be talking about strategy in particular, and I don't think anybody's ever done a podcast on wrestling strategy before.
I've heard this is like my favorite thing in the entire world is strategy. Like if you ever read any of my reviews, which anybody can read at either ProWrestlingOnly.com under Superstar Sleaze, that's SLEEZE, or RidingSpaceMountain.com. Yeah, definitely a Ric Flair fan. And so clearly offensive strategy is like my big thing.
So this become like one of the standard little tropes that people just kind of throw it out there casually as if Ric Flair has no psychology, basically. You know, I made a little thread recently asking people, you know, who's better, Nick Bockwinkel or Ric Flair? And one of the things that somebody just threw out there, you know, better to watch Bockwinkel work a headlock than Flair coming off the top. And I'm like, oh. It's just so... It's just this idea that Flair is literally just this guy who runs around taking bumps, doesn't really think about what he's doing. And I actually think it comes from this idea, because I've said this a few times. I've said that Flair is a very intuitive worker, okay? That is, he doesn't plan things out in advance like a Randy Savage.
This out in advance. We're calling it in the ring.
He calls it in the ring. But you see, that is a pro style that basically every worker in that, any worker worth their salt would call it in the ring from that era. I mean, Randy Savage was kind of weird when...
Randy Savage was definitely weird. But it somehow worked out for him.
Yeah, it worked out for him. And in fact, you know, that Savage Steamboat match, like, if you didn't know that it was all laid out, you probably wouldn't know because they made it seem organic, right?
Right, I mean, yeah.
But, I mean, that has become, you know, later on in WWE, they lay moves out a little bit more now, right? They kind of even in some circumstances rehearse matches and
I've heard the rumors of rehearsals and the really like stringent. I
think famously Hogan and Warrior had a dry run, didn't they, at one point?
Yeah, I've heard of Hogan and Warrior having dry runs. I mean, I went to a show, Boston House show, and I literally watched John Cena versus Kevin Owens, the match that happened. I watched that at a house show, and they literally had that match at the next pay-per-view.
So
seriously, move for move. It was crazy. But anyway, so they have rehearsals, yes.
Yeah, so Flair, of the old school, calls matches in the ring, okay?
Right.
And he is somebody who's had so many matches, even by the early 80s, he'd had so many matches with so many different people that he had developed what you can only call intuition. That is, he had a kind of feel for the crowd. He knew what was going on, and he is truly what I would call a ring general, somebody who knows, who controls the pace of a match, who controls the crowd, and he's calling the stuff in the ring as the heel, leading the match. Okay, what that means is, though, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have any strategy in kayfabe terms.
Exactly.
What it means is that he may not know what's going to happen in 10 minutes' time. He'll have an idea of where he's going, but what actually happens, he's coming up with on the fly. And this is the misnomer that I kind of get a little worked up about, Marty, that the fact that Flair is this intuitive worker is seen by some people to mean that he's just not very smart worker, or that he's an idiot, or that going,
right.
You know,
I've heard idiot's savant, which kind of it bothers me also.
Yeah, and that, you know, and the spot that they always bring up is the fact that he goes to the top and he gets slammed off, or he does the Flair flip or the Flair flop. Okay, we've heard it.
Going to the top, I have a talking point about this. It makes so much sense.
Okay,
it's
so
totally reasonable to go to the top rope.
Now, I want to, in this podcast, Marty, and I'm excited to do this as well, I want to break down what we think, okay, is Flair's kind of standard go-to strategy, okay? If you were to, like a generic Ric Flair match, what is his basic game plan in kayfabe terms? And I'll just, I'm interested to see what you say. So that's my question to you, Marty.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do this concisely and not get into too many details. There's two real important things to understand about Ric Flair just inherently about him. First thing is, the vast majority of the time you watch him wrestle in the 1980s is he is the world champion. Yep. And as he is the world champion, that means and we're always reminded about this from announcers, the challenger has to win the match. So Ric Flair, more often than not, is reacting to his opponent. That's important to remember. The second thing that is important is Ric Flair says he's a 60-minute man. Now that's because he says that because he has sex with a lot of women.
Yeah.
But not only is he doing that, he has shown that he is able to do that also in the ring. His cardiovascular ability, no joke, not even kayfabe, is like ridiculous. His ability to basically have a 54 or 56-minute sprint with Ricky Steamboat is like the craziest thing ever. I haven't watched that match in a long time, but I remember them cutting like the craziest pace during that match. I know you've watched it more recently than me, Parv.
Yeah.
If there's anybody who could like compete at that level for 60 minutes with Flair and Steamboat, it'd be something like Kobashi and Kawada. And I've seen that a little bit more recently, and they've had a couple 60-minute draws. And they're great 60-minute draws, but they are not at the same pace as Flair.
So it's funny, because I've been watching those matches recently, and I don't actually think they do cut the same pace as Steamboat and Flair.
No. And so so my point is, the key to Ric Flair's entire strategy is his cardiovascular ability.
So Marty, okay, we didn't talk really about what we were going to say before we did the show. Would you agree with that? It's not like we planned what we were going to say.
Right.
What you have just said is exactly the answer I would give. That you have to understand that A, he's the champion, and B, he's a 60-minute man. Those two things are central to any Ric Flair strategy talking point. I'll let you continue. I'm just saying I'm 100% on board with you. I completely agree with what you were going to say. And if I was to write your script, you would have just said that. So there we go.
Okay, so his key strength is the fact that is his cardiovascular ability. So the next logical conclusion would be that he needs to create movement to win his matches. This is where the problem lies for a lot of people. When you watch Ric Flair without really thinking about every single move and connecting the dots, it looks like a man running around like a chicken with its head cut off. He really does. But it's because he's using a perpetual motion strategy. He's constantly trying to break people's rhythm. You have to remember, so it's the two things coming together right now. You have his cardiovascular ability, and then you have the fact that a challenger is trying to dethrone him. So because he has to constantly react, he constantly has to break the people's momentum. So he has two different strategies. He either goes to the outside and breaks it through that, and then basically forces a timeout. The challenger has to cool off. He can regroup.
Yeah.
Or he is going to create a lot of movement. What you'll see is a lot of throws into the ropes. And the idea is by basically creating havoc in the ring, he hopes to take advantage in some way. And, you can see this. He'll often use a reverse elbow as a transition. He'll do the sleeper switch. Yeah. But what also comes out of this perpetual motion strategy, it's highly risky because in the event of this discombobulation, he often, as my mother would say, haste makes waste. So he's actually putting a lot on the line because it would be a lot safer to sit in a hold or to basically, wear down your opponent in some way. But when you're facing Lex Luger or when you're facing Ronnie Garvin, and Ronnie Garvin's constantly chopping you to the point where you have this disgusting weird red lump on your shoulder, you have to use these things that allow you to break the rhythm of your opponent. And so one of these things is perpetual motion. And so that's basically the idea. And I think this is actually best exhibited when he faced Kerry Von Erich when Von Erich was the NWA World Champion. You'll actually see Flair as a challenger, which is really rare at this time period. And what you see is Flair goes nonstop, perpetual motion, just all-out offensive assault on Kerry. But in his haste of trying to win the match, it constantly backfires on him. So if you're not paying attention to what Flair's really trying to do with all these little short kicks and chops and all that stuff, you kind of look at him like, oh my God, this guy totally has no idea what he's doing. But what he's really trying to do is he's trying to just mess everybody up. He's trying to keep you off balance mentally and physically. So
yeah, and I was just going to say, so would you agree that there are two aims to this basic strategy, okay? Number one, he's going to try to psych out the opponent through...
Yeah. He does that early in the match a lot.
Breaking their rhythm, bailing, all of his character work. It's all designed to kind of upset any kind of momentum or rhythm that the opponent can get going. Right. This is actually standard heel psychology, I would say.
There's pretty standard heels, yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing is, well, look, I'm the 60-minute man. You have to beat me. I don't have to beat you, so I'm going to blow you up.
Exactly. You see that with Luger.
Rocky versus Mr. T every single time out. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that completely.
So, so that is the basic game plan.
Right.
Now, what would you say to people who would argue then that given what we've just outlined, let's just say somebody accepts that therefore Ric Flair always has the same match? He always wrestles the Ric Flair match. What do you think about that kind of idea in terms of the strategy? Does he always have the same strategy then, or are there variations within that?
I think he does not have. So I think a lot of people's problems are again, this is like surface level because you see the same spots. Because you see the press slam off the top or what have you, or the Flair flop, you think he's having the same match, but he's really not. I mean, if you watch a Garvin match compared to a Luger match, or they're totally different. For the Luger match, and this is kind of again going back to the motion thing, he's going off the ropes. Why? Because Luger's a lot stronger than he is. There's a lot more power to Luger. So to knock him off, he needs to actually have momentum. So he needs, not only is just his mass, he needs velocity too. And then you'll see later on in the match, in order to win the match, Ric Flair he basically only has the figure four, but he really doesn't have a bomb per se. So in essence, what he needs to do is he needs to create ways to actually take Luger down. So one of those ways is coming off the ropes and, gaining some speed. And another way would be going off the top rope. So when you go off the top rope, you have potential energy. It's basically free energy. and you come off the top, and you've converted that to kinetic energy, and you come crashing down on your opponent. And now, of course, in today's wrestling, they've kind of fucked it up. Excuse my language. They've basically, it's been oversaturated, so nobody really pays attention to it. But in the 80s, when you came down on somebody, it was a really big deal. It could be a match ender. And so you see these different. So that's Flair against Luger. He went up to the top rope. He got caught in a superplex in the one match I watched, and then in other matches with the press slam. And basically, he needed to find ways to combat Luger's power, and so he had to go up top to the rope or to the side of the ropes. But against Ronnie Garvin, who's a lot smaller, the total idea was to go toe to toe with him. And what he did with him was he did a lot of crowding. He would try to shorten up his the opponent's distance, because if you don't have a full range of chopping motion, then he can't hit you as hard. So you'd see Flair do a lot of crowding, a lot of short knees, a lot of Flair is probably the greatest corner wrestler in all time. Maybe Vader can be close to him, but honestly, Flair is the master of the corner, because the corner is a transient moment. It should be a clean break, but it's not. And in crowding Ronnie Garvin, he was trying to score advantages. But Garvin being the babyface, better. The idea being that Garvin is a better wrestler, because babyfaces are inherently better than heels. That tends to be the idea. He would be able to reverse it around on Flair. But so the basic principle here is crowding and then shortening up the distance. So it was a totally different match. Against Garvin, he's going to wrestle one-on-one, very violent physical style. Against Luger, he's going to have to come up with different ways to use momentum to win the match. And then I watched a different match against Ricky Morton, where Flair's actually the bigger wrestler. And at the end of the day, Ric Flair's a bully. He's not the character is not a good human being. He's a mean man. And but because he's up against Luger and he's not one of the bigger wrestlers, we see him for what he is when he's being bullied around. But when he finally gets a chance to bully somebody else, we get to see him at his sadistic worst. So yeah, there are times where Flair just sort of plugs and plays people into his formula. At the end of the day, like he would tell you, he had to have matches against Bulldog Brown in Kansas City. So he needed a formula to get himself out of that. But when he was up against top flight opponents, he was reacting to an opponent, and he wasn't just sticking them in a formula.
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot of interesting things here. The first thing is that you mentioned that he doesn't really have any bombs, and if you listen to Ric Flair's actual show, his podcast,
it's a great show.
One of his running gags, though, is that his only offense was a chop and a low blow or whatever. Doesn't he say that?
That reminds me. I have a talking point about chops at some point.
No, I don't actually agree with that. He's probably thinking about his kind of late, like his kind of early 2000s WWE version, right? Where he basically pared down to about 3 different moves by that point in his career. But it's not actually true that Flair only has the chop or only has the figure 4. He does do other moves.
That's not what I meant by a bomb. A bomb was like more of a real finish, kind of like real, mess them up type thing.
Like a high. He doesn't have a high impact throw finisher type thing.
Right. He's got I know he does the butterfly suplex. He's got the knee drop. He's got stuff. Don't get me wrong. He's got the delayed vertical suplex. Yeah. But these aren't moves that basically it's not something quick that he can pull out against Lex Luger if he was to be desperate. Right.
So one of the things that people might say is that, well, if his finisher is the figure 4, how come he doesn't target the leg from early on then? That would be one. I'm just going to play devil's advocate. Oh. How would you counter that charge?
I would say that, so basically, it's a good. It is a good point. I think he kind of has to play into what's happening and what his opponent gives to him. You could say he could. Well, see, Ric Flair, even though he does the amateur stuff with Ricky Steamboat, tends not to do too much amateur wrestling with other opponents, and he's not trying to take people down. So if he can't really take down a Lex Luger or Kerry Von Erich, it's kind of hard to start working on the leg. And you'll see a lot of work on the midsection and trying to, to break up their rhythm. But I think what ends up happening is he doesn't usually have an advantage early on in the match. So I don't know. Maybe that could have been something he should have learned, was how to set up the leg earlier. I can understand people's point of view on that, but I think that at the end of the day, when you're going in the heat of battle against somebody who's usually larger than you, I think it was just hard for him. He didn't have a takedown, so I don't see how he could have actually started working on the leg otherwise. I mean, basically, he had to start on the upper body and work his way down for the most part, I would say.
You see, often when I'm watching Flair matches, I'm waiting for that transition.
Right,
yes. And I think one of the hallmarks of his matches is that transition comes actually quite later on in a match than it would usually come. So, I mean, typically a match will go the babyface shine, then you'll have a lengthy heel heat segment, control, the heat. Then you have the comeback, and then you get the finish. Okay, that's your typical structure. But I would say in a Flair match, it's not that the shine is always extended, but there's a longer feeling out. First of all, you get this longer feeling out process, the psych out, the bails, etc. Then you get this kind of delayed shine where Flair is basically saying to the opponent, right, what have you got? Give me every single thing you've got. And he will take everything. Right. Like, so let's say it's Luger, okay?
Yeah.
And he'll be like, well, what have you got, Luger? He'll take the lariat. He'll take the
power slam.
The gorilla press slam.
Oh, the press slam, yeah, he did.
Yeah, the power slam. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, what have you got now, Luger? And then maybe they do the whole thing again. Like another gorilla press slam. And then it's like, well, what have you got now? Coming off the top, go into the outside, blah, blah, blah. And once you've been through it like 2 or 3 times, you'll see the baby faces actually starting to be like, well, what do I do now? How am I going to, And here is where, you have to beat me, and you've given me everything you've got. Now is the time. Now you're blown up. Now you're worn out. Then you get that transition. And in fact, that Luger match that you watched, the Starrcade 88 one, has, as I mentioned on a show recently, one of the best transitions of all time for me, where you see Flair switch very quickly into focusing on that leg like an assassin. So when it mattered, the
chair shot was
But then, did you see after the chair shot? Did you see how quickly he hones in on that leg? You got the block shot, you got the shin breaker, I can't remember if he did a shin breaker in that match, but
I think he tends to do the knee crusher, the shin breaker. When Flair does work the leg, he is quite good at it.
And then that all sets up to the figure 4, which, as he keeps on saying on the show, never actually puts anyone away. But you can see it as his basic kind of game plan. He does take out that leg often towards the end of a match, and
it is towards the end, but because the figure 4 is considered a very effective submission, even though it didn't win him that many matches, you can put the figure 4 on without working the knee and still expect to get a tap out. That's the idea behind it.
So in the Luger match, his leg buckles. I want to say there's a Jimmy Garvin match where doesn't Garvin pass out to the pain or something like that?
I've never actually seen Flair versus Jimmy Garvin.
There's so what I'm saying is that there is a number of different because the figure 4 doesn't actually put people away. You see a range of different finishes on Ric Flair matches, and they can actually finish in any number of different ways.
At the end of the day, babyfaces submitting is just it's counterintuitive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard for a babyface to submit, especially if you're a top-level babyface. Doesn't look good. So, in kayfabe terms, it could happen, but realistically, you wouldn't want it to happen.
Your boy Ric Flair is coming to Winnipeg. Here he is, the world heavyweight. Wally Carbo, the great wrestling promoter, called me on the phone and said, Nate, said Slick Rick, champ, I'm going to make the price right. Brother, your credentials are unlimited. But you gotta take a long look at yourself before you walk that aisle. Because this right now is the toughest piece of work in wrestling today. Not Ricky Martel, not the Road Warriors, not the Freebirds, not the Road Warriors, but Ric Flair, woo, the living legend, the world champion.
I can't help that I'm custom made. I can't help, but I'll tell you this. I can't help that I look good, smell good, can't dance all night long. I can't help that I'm custom made. I can't help, but I'll tell you this. I can't help that I'm the greatest wrestler alive today. That's the world champion.
Okay, well, there's one other thing I wanted to get into as well, which is something I've talked about in the past, Marty, and that is the notion of what Ric Flair's character is and how that plays in. Yeah. And how does that play into his matches? Okay, so for anyone who's not familiar with it, I'll just run through this idea. Okay, one more time, and then you can comment, Marty, on how you feel it plays into this strategy that we're talking about. So for my money, you think like, what is Ric Flair's character? And you could say, well, maybe he's a chicken shit, right? He's a chicken shit heel.
Yep.
Now, I don't think that's actually true. Like a true chicken shit heel is like the Honky Tonk Man.
Yeah.
Or like Money Incorporated, they played a real, like, true, you know, they would literally leave rather than finish out a match. Mm-hmm. Or Lawler in '93 when he was in WF. In fact, WF tended to book true chicken shit heels. Tully Blanchard is a bit of a chicken shit heel, I would say, more than Flair is. So Flair, for my money, is not actually a proper chicken shit. Although that is complicated by the fact that at some point in his career he was. Like
this is true.
Yeah, I would point to the Kevin Green feud in 1996.
Where I haven't actually seen that.
Is it 95 or 96?
No, it's in 96. Yeah, it's right before the NWO.
Yeah, so there you have like Flair literally hiding behind Arn and stuff like that. Like he's kind of like a true chicken shit around that time in his career. Mm-hmm. But we're mainly talking 80s NWA champ Ric Flair, who was billed as the greatest of all time type thing. Right. Now, I would say that his basic idea with the idea of the chicken shit character is actually to lull the opponent into a false sense of security.
I wouldn't say that in that way. I would say it's just another way to break your momentum. Because by begging off and running into the corner, you're forcing another rope break again. But yeah, I guess you could say lulling into a false sense of security too, because now the babyface really thinks he's on top. I guess you could work in both ways. So, I mean,
but the basic idea of all that stuff is that he's buying time.
Right. It's all timeout strategy type thing. Yeah.
He's looking for an opportunity, a way in, while at the same time making his opponent think, oh, I've got the beating of this guy. And possibly even making the audience think, the crowd think, ooh, maybe this guy's got a chance against the champion. Which, I mean, like, outside of kayfabe terms, of course, is always the idea with the NWA champ. You have to believe that the challenger has a chance, otherwise, what have you got to cheer for, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that. But then, I mean, my other idea is that his true character isn't actually the chicken shit, but is in fact a borderline psychopath. He's basically somebody who will do anything. And you only see it in certain moments, in moments where he gets desperate,
Exactly.
He will do anything to keep hold of that title because the title is him. Yep. So he can't, it's part of his manhood,
Right.
And then you see all sorts of different tactics or strategies come out where he will literally do anything to hold on to that.
And that's why he runs around with like a chicken with his head cut off. Is because he's so desperate to try to keep winning that he just throws chops, he's running around, he's kicking people in the midsection, he's doing anything he can to win the match.
But on top of that, Marty, I have two other characters as well.
I know you've got four faces.
Yeah, right? There are four faces, yes.
Four faces. Well, actually, let me just say one more thing about that face of Flair. I think it's easily summed up in this sentence: he was always more afraid to lose than he loved to win. He was definitely someone more afraid of losing than anything else.
Absolutely. I actually think that one of the reasons it's so effective and rings so true is because I actually think that there is that in the real life Ric Flair. You know, he has got a little bit of insecurity in him.
He does.
Or a lot of insecurity, if you want.
He does, actually.
Where, he's the greatest wrestler of all time, but he still has that kind of anxiety about his own status in a weird way. Like,
yep.
And a lot of the third face, which is, the slick Rick character, the cocky, strutting, arrogant heel.
Yeah.
The guy who's peacocking around, custom made, or all of that is designed to cover up all of those anxieties and
exactly.
So I mean that's not just in his promos and in his character work though. It actually comes through in the matches themselves.
Yeah.
How many times have you seen him do he goes for the handshake and then he slick backs his hair or whatever. That's him saying, "Don't worry about this. I'm confident." Whereas really deep down, he's absolutely terrified that he's going to lose his belt, But then, underneath all of that, again, there is what I call the true blue athlete. Basically, it's Ric Flair from Starrcade '83. It's
babyface Ric Flair.
It's babyface Ric Flair. He deep down, he loves his family. He loves his friends. He's a true, he's a true wrestler.
Right. It's not just Starrcade '83. It's Starrcade '93 too, right?
Starrcade '93. But I actually think that character is also buried in there a lot of the time. You see it come out. I don't know. Let's just say when he's wrestling in Japan against Jumbo, or when he's coming in as the big champ in any given town. That sense of legitimacy, that sense of, this guy really does care about wrestling, also comes through. I even think it comes through in something like Royal Rumble '92. Like, okay, he's the hated heel, he's a chicken shit, he's all of these different things, but even in Royal Rumble '92, like, anybody who's a WF fan has to say, "Oh, hold on, this really matters to Ric Flair. He did it. He went in, he lasted the 60 minutes, and he came out on top," type thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it actually feeds into the other characters. So that portion actually has a lot of macho pride, and it's the macho pride that fuels the psychopathic desperation and the peacocking. So I think deep down, Ric Flair, the person, I think is actually a relatively is a nice guy, probably too nice due to his insecurities. But but I think the macho pride actually fuels a lot of the heel characteristics too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, do we have any other aspects of the psychology that you want to discuss, Marty?
Yes. So JR actually came up with this one, and you'll appreciate it because it's American football analogy.
Is this Jim Ross? Jim Ross?
Funny? This is Jim Ross. You know what's funny about Jim Ross is he actually didn't take his own phrase to the logical football analogy that I'm about to take it to. So I'm doing the football analogy, but JR did the original talking point about chops. So, Parv, I know you've been watching American football, right?
Yep.
How are the Seahawks doing?
Well, I've still got 40 minutes left of their match against the Bears, but they were doing pretty well last time I saw.
Oh, okay. I don't actually watch that much American football. Anyways, but I do know enough about it to know the basic strategies. And today's football is a lot different. But when I was growing up, even in the 90s, a lot of it was running based. You had to have a great running back, and the idea would be, you run a lot in the first quarter. You get 2 to 3 yards, but if you kept pounding the middle, eventually by the fourth quarter, the defensive line that you were playing against would break down, and those 2 to 3 yards would become 5 to 7 yards. So the idea is war of attrition.
Mm-hmm.
And JR brings that up about the chops being a war of attrition. The first one is, it's like a wake-up call. Luger's going to no-sell it, or Kerry Von Erich will no-sell it, or what have you. But as it goes deeper and deeper in the match, those chops are going to start taking effect. They're going to wear down your opponent, and you're going to start evacuating the breath from Luger's lungs. And once you evacuate the breath from somebody's lungs, now Flair has even more of a cardio advantage. So that's the idea behind the chops. It plays right into his cardio advantage. Right.
And here's something we have to talk about, Marty, because and I'm just in the interest of full disclosure.
Yeah.
On this series, I'm not inviting anyone who's not a Flair fan. So
is Charles the next one? Is Charles coming up?
Charles will be on. It's going to be all my buddies. Oh. But screw it. Why should I? Why should I want to be fair to Flair? I don't want to.
But where's Gorilla though? You need a Gorilla.
But in the interests of some semblance of balance here, Marty, I do want to ask this question of: are any of these ideas that Flair isn't a smart worker? And is there any sense in which you think they're valid? So you could say that you and I are using various different strains of Johnny Logic. We could say to justify, what Flair does in matches. Is it true that he's not smart, quote unquote? And what does that mean exactly in your estimation?
So most people probably, like I said, I think most people take his perpetual motion strategy and believe it to just be basically an 1980s version of a spot fest. Nowadays spot fests are like 450 splashes and weird modified suplexes and all sorts of twists and doodads. But in the 1980s, I don't want to say it's spot fest, but there are a lot of spots in the match compared to the 1970s. Is that true? I don't watch as much 70s as you do. There's more spots in Flair matches, right? There's more action.
Yeah, this is just my estimation. And because people don't tend to watch 70s stuff, I've never been able to get anybody to engage me on this point.
I've watched 4 Briscoe matches, 4 Harley Race matches from the 70s, and I watched Terry Funk versus Jumbo from 1956.
So for my money, Marty, between Jack Briscoe and Harley Race, and also Terry Funk, something happens where I would say there is a clear difference between the Jack Briscoes of this world and Terry Funk and Harley Race, who both basically work the same style as Ric Flair. As in, all of those guys. In fact, Terry's a tiny bit more technical, I guess, but all of those guys bump big. You see more motion in their matches. You see more throws in their matches. And for me, Harley Race is the kind of inventor of the modern style, quote unquote, that we're used to seeing. 80s wrestling basically is born in the Harley Race style of bumping big, motion, suplexes, throws, bombs. And Flair is the inheritor of those two NWA champs, Race and Terry Funk. Because Terry Funk, from what I've seen, even though he doesn't have that many defenses on tape, from what I've seen, he worked more towards that style as well. Mm-hmm. Would you agree? Would you agree with that kind of from what you've seen? Would you agree with that general kind of? You're going to see more mat work in a Jack Briscoe match, more kind of selling holds and strategy, quote unquote, on the mat. And in a Harley Race match, you're going to see more bombs.
Yeah, you're definitely going to see a lot more bombs and bumps in Harley Race matches. I remember the Jack Briscoe matches. It did have a real sports feel to it. Jack was going for a lot of takedowns and stuff. And he was getting those takedowns, and then the Jumbo or Baba had their bombs to combat Briscoe in the matches, and they're great matches. But so I can see why people think that on the surface level, if you were just to kind of casually watch a Ric Flair match, it just seems like a lot of stuff's happening and it doesn't all kind of make sense. But think about it in terms of what you want. Like if I'm trying to win a match. Selling opponent's move. I understand selling is an important part of professional wrestling, but I've never seen a UFC. I mean, UFC fighters only have to sell, quote unquote, when they're actually really, really friggin' hurt. You actually don't want to do that in the UFC. Ric Flair is just trying to win the match by constantly hitting back, and it's just backfiring on him because he's constantly doing stuff that in haste makes waste. He's discombobulated himself basically by constantly attacking. But eventually he does score because if you hit a person enough in the midsection, if you keep trying, eventually you will win. It's just statistics. So I think that's mostly my belief here is that if you watch, like if you were, this is what I wanted to say. I wanted to say this at some point. Now I'm going to say it now.
All right.
Stone Cold has a great quote. It's my favorite quote from any professional wrestler in terms of how you should work a match. Think, shoot, but work. And I feel like Ric Flair embodies think, shoot, but work.
Right. Okay. So can you explain how he does that? How does he think, shoot, but work?
He thinks shoot because when somebody has him in the corner or somebody is beating on him, like if he's in a hold, right? Somebody's working a hold. Garvin was working a front face lock. Luger was working an armbar. I saw Flair do an elbow to Luger. He kicked a short knee to Luger, and I saw him eventually poke him in the eye. So it was like a constant like modulation of things. Eventually he's like, fuck it, I'm going to lose my arm. I have to thumb this guy in the eye. Garvin working the front face lock. He drives him into the corner. And I forget, he did one other move too. But basically the idea is he's just constantly struggling. He's just like a force of nature, and he's trying to overcome. You have to remember these baby faces, I mean, this is it. This is their shot at the title. So basically they're going on a fast break early. He has to like deal with the fact that they're pouring on the offense. So he's constantly struggling against this by, taking shortcuts, by breaking momentum, and by, these short knees, these pokes to the eyes, and these elbows. So you constantly see these little strikes, these little moves that he's constantly fighting back. And this is another thing I wanted to say. In non-kayfabe terms, this makes the babyface look good because he is now earning his babyface shine. There's nothing that I don't mind a good exhibition of professional wrestling. It's fine. But there's so many times where I'll just watch babyfaces do their shine, have a transition, the heel will do their heat segment, and it's almost like each other plays ragdoll for each other. You'll never see Ric Flair play ragdoll for anybody, at least not in the 1980s. He never ragdolls. He will constantly hit back, and you have to hit through him. And so I forget what the point was, but I feel like this is a good stopping point.
I'm the woo! 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 We're talking about the woo! Man, they're hot today, huh? Woo! Woo! Woo!
So there's one other little criticism that I have that I see brought up, and it's a talking point by our friend, actually, strike that, by a poster on PWO who goes by JDW. And he says that so much of the body of Ric Flair matches is quote-unquote stuff to do. Now, how do you respond to the stuff to do talking point? Because I find it unbelievably irritating. But because my thought on the stuff to do talking point is that, well, okay, we can watch Misawa versus Kawada. How much of the stuff they're doing is stuff to do? Like,
there's a lot of spots in Misawa versus Kawada.
What's the difference between Misawa and Kawada stuff to do and Ric Flair stuff to do, or any other wrestler stuff to do? I just don't understand what that talking point is meant to be getting at. So anyway, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
So there's two things. I mean, this kind of goes back to people who might think that Ric Flair has no I mean, this is all about Ric Flair not having psychology. And so there's two things. There's two different things he could be bringing up. And so one, I think I've addressed at length at this point, which is basically, is Ric Flair's perpetual motion, his constant doing of shit, excuse my language, totally baseless, but I say it's part of a grander strategy. So the other point would be stuff to do would be, is he trying to get his shit in? Basically, does he feel the need to shoehorn certain spots into a match when they don't belong in the match?
Right.
He does that. Yeah, he does. And Ric Flair's not a perfect wrestler. Like, nobody's perfect at all. And so he does do this. I mean, I'm trying to... I didn't watch any, like, really, like, pure Flair formula matches. And, like, I watched the Coco Ware Memphis match a couple years ago. I know people liked it a lot, but I kind of remember that one being very Flair formulaic.
Well, I mean, for me, the plug-and-play opponents are Nikita.
Yeah.
In 85.
I haven't seen Nikita in a long time. I think I saw the Starrcade 86, and that was it. Sting, plug-and-play opponent.
And Sting.
Big one. Especially
Sting in Clash 1. That would be, for me, that is the classic plug-and-play Ric Flair match, which is why I don't rate it very highly.
And I don't rate it highly either. And I think Flair fans know when he's doing it. We're not oblivious to this idea that Ric Flair can base. There's a reason why people say Ric Flair can carry a broomstick. Ric Flair has a very special ability to have basically have a professional wrestling match unto himself. He has enough bumps and spots that he literally could have a professional wrestling match probably with me in the 1980s, as long as I could bump over for him, and he would sell for me. And I'm 6 feet tall, at least got the height, but and I got the hair for it, but no, I don't have the muscle mass. But anyway, point is, carry a broomstick, and there's a reason for it. It's because he has everything at his disposal to have the match by himself. There's other people who can do that. I know one person that you get annoyed when he gets compared to him, but it's actually true, is Bret Hart has enough spots that Bret Hart can have a match basically by himself. He has enough bumps that he can take to feed his opponent that Bret Hart can have a match by himself. And there's not a lot of wrestlers who can say that. Arn Anderson's another one I would say can do that. But it's a cool capability, and I think people underrate it because it looks samey. But when you remember that people in Memphis didn't get the TV from Atlanta, you can get away with this shit.
But I also think that it is. And what I said right at the start of the show, it's kind of taken for granted. It's like, okay, not anybody can do this.
No.
And it's why it's. I mean, I know we're not talking about him, but it's why I get kind of a little bit irritated when people make comparisons to like a Ted DiBiase. The fact of being a great worker is like, okay. The fact that he's able to do that with any opponent is something that you can't say. Okay, well, that's just that's. I don't understand why that capability is completely seconded to this notion of psychology and storytelling, which seems to me to come above and beyond everything else. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is that I don't understand why it's leveled against, say, Flair. And not against all these extremely highly rated All Japan matches that I talk about. Which I mean, okay, yes, occasionally they'll have really interesting storylines running through them and so on. But a lot of those matches, to me, look like, okay, we're going to run through these 6 or 7 or 8 spots for the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to get into the meat of the match or whatever. Because if you're going to go 40 minutes, what are you going to do in the time? Do you know what I mean? It's not.
I know what you mean. I mean, and that comes back to the fact that All Japan, just like Ric Flair, not every match is a 5-star match. It turns out that All Japan 90s tends to have more highly rated matches. But the thing with All Japan that they had the benefit of that Ric Flair didn't was they could build on matches, so they could have the next match built. The idea is they all build on one another. Flair has to wrestle a different wrestler in a different town. There's no build. There's no feeling of But
if you look at the times that he does get to do that, you mentioned Luger, you mentioned Garvin, Ricky Steamboat,
Kerry Von
Erich. when he Jumbo, when he does have when he is able to have a series of matches with somebody, you can see him building. Terry Funk, even he has 2 different matches with him.
Right.
You can see that no 2 matches are the same in any of those series, and they do build on each other, and they refer back to each other. So and let's face it, very few of those workers that we just mentioned, with the possible exception of Funk and Steamboat, are on the level of a Kawada or a Misawa, right?
That's true. Yeah, I mean, and that's a good point. I mean, so Flair had to work with a wider variety of opponents. I mean, in some way, I mean, All Japan 90s. That's what makes the All Japan 90s really hard to rate, is because they all wrestled each other for so long, and it was a generally closed environment. So it becomes difficult to rate them against other people. But, that is one benefit for Flair, is that we get a wide variety, probably the widest variety of opponents for any all-time great wrestler.
But my general point is, though, it's not like you can always say that the psychology is so perfect in all Japan. No. I rated those matches as highly as anybody. Yeah. But let's face it, they are spotty on occasion. Probably spottier than a Ric Flair match.
There are more spots in All Japan than most matches, of course, but there's just a lot of different. There's a lot of different things. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of struggle in their matches. There's a general sense of earning things, and there's earning in Ric Flair. I mean, I just went through the fact that because Ric Flair is this force of nature, and he's constantly coming at you, in order to earn your shine, you have to constantly be fighting through his offense, his constant little jabs at your midsection. So, I mean, he's a force of nature in a different way, Marty, as well, which is that because he's the nature boy, he can take a lot of that stuff and still keep on going. Which is one of the things we haven't said. Yeah.
Yeah, the one other thing I wanted to say as well, and I think it's come through what we've talked about, the strategy over the past hour, Marty, is that I think very often storytelling is people think about storytelling and they think typically about limb work, right? Let's face it, so many people think storytelling, that's Arn Anderson or the Andersons working over a leg or an arm.
Well,
right?
It makes sense. I mean, you want to take down a body part, you've debilitated your opponent, you'll most likely win. That's one facet of storytelling. It's probably the easiest recognizable one.
But other stories are available, right?
What was that?
Other stories are available.
Other stories are available. David versus Goliath is probably my favorite story. I am a huge fan of. Thanks to Where the Big Boys Play, I finally felt the urge to watch John Cena versus Umaga. Holy shit. What an amazing David versus Goliath match. I mean, I just watched Jerry Lawler versus Bam Bam Bigelow, Texas Death Match. Another amazing David versus Goliath match. So there's that type of match. There's veteran versus, rookie. I love that pairing. That's always a ton of fun.
What about the one you watched, Ric Flair versus Ricky Morton?
That's great. I love that.
That's the overconfident
bully.
The overconfident bully taking on an opponent he underestimates, which is the
lovable guy who wants to get revenge for what happened to the nose, and you constantly see him. He's twisting Ric Flair's huge honker of a nose. He's throwing him into the cage. He's punching him, and so that might be one. And that's one thing that I wanted to bring up is the wide gamut of matches that Ric Flair can have. I mean, he can have your championship style match. He can have your blood feud. He can have your toe-to-toe brawl. He can do veteran versus rookie. He kind of did David versus Goliath with Vader. We didn't touch on babyface Flair, but he did David versus Goliath there, kind of. Basically, if there was a match that's a match genre that's existed, he's done it all. He's had to wrestle power wrestlers. He's had to wrestle, pure strikers like Garvin, technical wrestlers like Wyndham and Steamboat, Morton, the undersized babyface. He's wrestled in Japan. He can wrestle a wide gambit of matches.
No, absolutely, Marty. And the thing that really irritates me, though, is that we say all of this, and we'll keep on saying it, and over the next 3 or 4 shows, I'm sure some of these points will come up again. And yet, people just default to the same old stuff. Like they literally will just go back to he comes off the top. Like, what do you say?
All I say to that part is just repeat after me. Mass times gravity times height equals 1/2 times mass times velocity squared. He's just going to increase it's free energy, man. Velocity equals the square root of 2gh. That's free velocity, baby. Isaac Newton is basically telling you Ric Flair is the greatest wrestler of all time. Isaac Newton, physics 101. Flair took it. Wrestling fans need to take physics.
And don't forget, he did beat Harley.
He did beat Harley with the crossbody off the top, too. That's right.
And when he's a babyface, he does hit it as well, which is hilarious. Because doesn't he hit it again? I'm sure there's another spot where he hits that.
I think there are occasional spots. Pretty much whenever he's a babyface, he does hit the spot. He tends to. I don't want to say he always hits it. I will say, in 2006 or something, when he was like basically way over the hill, he hit the crossbody off the top on, like, I don't know, Carlito, I think, or something, and Jerry Lawler lost his shit. It was a pretty cool mark-out moment. He was like, I can't believe it. Ric Flair hit a move off the top rope.
So yeah, the one thing I wanted to touch on before we go, Marty, because I think you're a good person to ask about this as well, is the comparison with Nick Bockwinkel. Okay. Now, so I recently made this thread about comparing Bock and Flair, and Bock basically had some voters. Okay. And I'm really high. I really like Nick Bockwinkel. Okay.
I really
but it was taken as a basic given in that thread that Bockwinkel is the smarter wrestler. And I just wanted to address that before we sign out here, because you've seen your fair share of Bockwinkel.
I have indeed.
Now, how do you kind of comment on the Flair versus Bock comparison in terms of being a smart wrestler?
Well, the first thought came to my head. Sounds a little it sounds like it could be considered a slight upon people. But I can't think of a better way to say it, so I'm just going to say it. I think they're confusing like minimalism with the idea of being smart. Throughout my entire life, I've never been a minimalist, and so I enjoy actually minimalistic wrestling more so than in other art forms where I tend to really dislike minimalism. Mm-hmm. So that tends to be the thing. Like, I love Bockwinkel; he's a very entertaining professional wrestler, but I watched a Jerry Lawler match where he sat in a 10-minute top wrist lock. Okay? Right. Was it really... I mean, all right, if I'm thinking about this totally in kayfabe terms, I guess it makes sense why give up the hold. I hate when wrestlers give up holds. I agree with that. I guess my problem with that would really be with Lawler. He should have struggled more. But regardless, as a fan, I just watched a 10-minute top wrist lock, and I ain't getting my 10 minutes back.
Yeah.
Was the finish stretch awesome? Yeah. So that's kind of my thing with Bockwinkel, is he can be a little dry at times.
You see, I've got this idea that fans, whether they realize it or not, and I mean, people often get very angry with me, Marty,
yes,
for questioning motives, as you know.
Yeah.
People like really get pissed off. They're like, "Well, why can't it just be my view?" type thing. Mm-hmm. But people have to understand that I'm not calling any. I don't actually think that anybody's making these arguments in bad faith. Okay, mm-hmm. I'm just trying to understand how somebody can come to certain positions. Okay, mm-hmm. And I do think that in the fandom in wrestling, and this is probably a legacy thing, people do equate mat work with strategy in a really one-to-one way. Mm. And I think it goes back to the idea of a Dory Funk Jr. or a Luthez, or it goes back to that idea of what kind of wrestling strategy is. If you were a really thinking man's wrestler, probably you'd do holds rather than bump around the ring. Would you agree with that? I mean,
I do tend to agree with that, and that kind of goes back to you said this similar thing to me, that they're conflating minimalism with intelligence, because basically Bockwinkel isn't moving around as much, and therefore, and it's a little bit more. There's less spots in his matches, and so therefore it's more minimalistic, and therefore they're saying that it's smarter wrestling. I wouldn't agree with that per se.
I mean, I'm not calling anybody a mark here, okay? Yeah. But his character is an intellectual. His character is, I am an intellectual, I'm smarter than you, okay? Mm-hmm. Dory Funk Jr.'s character, and if you look at the basic strategy of a Dory match, you'll see quite similar stuff to your basic Bok, okay?
Yeah.
In terms of just what his game plan is, his character was, I'm a smart wrestler. I'm a chess master. I'm a kind of, anybody who's got that basic character is gonna and then does more mat work and things. you're then gonna draw the conclusion, well, what they're doing is smart in the ring. Does that make any sense?
No, I mean, I agree with you. I think there is a sense of working fans. I've gone on record before saying this about Shawn Michaels, but then I'm starting to realize that I actually like Shawn Michaels more than I used to give him credit for. But that by the WWE constantly telling you that Shawn Michaels is the greatest wrestler of all time, that a lot of wrestling fans have actually believed it.
Well, I've made the same argument many times, Marty, yeah. But could then somebody turn it back around on us and say, well, the true marks are us, because we were told for a decade that Ric Flair was the greatest of all time, and we think, he's one of the greatest of all time.
Well, no, it doesn't work like that, because we just did an hour podcast discussing why he's the greatest of all time. All right, so I'm reading my reviews of Nick Bockwinkel. I have to admit that I don't have the world's greatest memory sometimes with the matches. So guess what? Nick Bockwinkel wrestles a lot like he's got a very similar strategy as Ric Flair. So I'm reading the matches against Rick Martel, and most of what I'm writing about is how Bockwinkel focuses on counteracting Martel's offense with short jabs to the ribs, very similar to Flair's short knee jab to the midsection that he'll use to break rhythm. So it looks like Bockwinkel, at least in the Martel matches, is wrestling a similar style. It's probably not, he's not using as much perpetual motion, it looks like, but it's the same idea of constantly breaking your opponent's momentum, and always, the idea of always struggling and always trying to win the match by, actually fighting back. I mean, that's probably my biggest problem with pro wrestling, is when people don't actually fight back. That's really what annoys me. So yeah, and I mean, Nick Bockwinkel is a great wrestler. I have to watch him more. I have these reviews, but I didn't really put together a totally comprehensive Nick Bockwinkel package. But yeah, I mean, Bockwinkel's probably going to be in my top 25, I'd say.
But even with Bockwinkel, and I would agree that Bockwinkel is a smart wrestler.
He is a smart wrestler.
He's engaging. He does a lot of really good things.
He's very good at selling. We didn't talk about Ric Flair's selling, but Ric Flair's also an amazing seller. I mean, we take things. We take that so much for granted that we don't even mention it. But he's also a great vocal seller, Ric Flair. Oh, but, that's probably the greatest verbal seller of all time. Him and Lex Luger is the noisiest match ever.
Yeah, but on Bok, I mean, I like some of the little things he does. I love the fact that when he's working a hold, for example, he also punches the limb or whatever as well.
Yeah, he does that. There was a match against Jumbo where he's got the knee on top of on Jumbo's head, adding extra leverage.
He does a lot of cool stuff, Bok.
He does do a lot of cool stuff.
And just like Flair, we see him in a variety of different contexts, working different styles of matches and so on and so forth.
I haven't seen Nick Bockwinkel brawl yet. I'm very excited for it. We got to see the Wahoo match at some point.
Which is basically part and parcel of being a champion.
Yeah.
In the 80s, right? Or in the 70s. But I would say that all of the criticisms that you could level at Ric Flair, stuff to do, go-to spots, you could level at Nick Bockwinkel. How many times did you see the King of the Mountain during the AWA set? How many times did you see Bockwinkel get slammed in the same kind of, every wrestler has their signature bump. If you watch somebody longer, I have watched tons of Terry Funk recently, and Terry Funk has so many go-to spots. The roly-poly, the bark like a dog thing, like any wrestler that you pick up, Stan Hansen, every single, I mean, Matt, who is somebody who we may have indirectly been talking about doing this show, Marty, has in his in fairness to him, drawn criticisms against Stan Hansen that every single Stan Hansen match is basically the charging bull, him raging, coming out of the gates, the jump finish, etc.
Yeah,
I just don't think there's any wrestler that doesn't have these things that you can't like. I would level stuff to do and go-to spots against every single wrestler I've ever seen. But I mean, every Kobashi match has the triple chop thing. Every Masawa match has the elbow. Like I don't understand what every Ted DiBiase match has the 360 bump he does. Like every Harley Race match has got a spot where he'll do a falling headbutt. It's just what the guys do.
Along with a pile driver early in the match and then them kicking out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, no, absolutely. But it's like,
I'm in favor of all this. I believe in formula. I'm probably one of the strongest defenders of formula. If you go, I go to concerts. I go to concerts all the time. I went to 6 and 7 weeks this summer. I love deep cuts. But at the end of the day, what song gets you pumped up, gets the whole crowd pumped up? It ain't the deep cuts, baby. It's the greatest hits. You got to have greatest hits.
But okay, all right. So somebody listening could say, okay, well, yes. If we want to see the greatest hits, are we then throwing psychology out the window?
No, because you work the greatest hits in a logical fashion within your match.
And that makes everything that Flair does make sense. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, well, shall we end it there, Marty? Do you have anything else to add?
I do not have anything else to add. RidingSpaceMountain.blogspot.com will have more blogs up soon. I've watched a ton of professional wrestling, and I got to get it all collected into one spot. So I think I'm going to stop watching wrestling and kind of do a little bit of organizational work. Tag team's back again. Whoop, there it is. We tried to record last week, but it didn't happen for us. So we are recording on Thursday, looking at the month of March 1987. I think all the matches we look at are from that month from the World Wrestling Federation.
Well, great. Well, listen to that show and also listen to any of my old shows if you haven't. The archive is all there. And I'll be back again really soon with another edition of Fair to Flair because I'm I'm on a roll here, Marty. I feel like this needs to be said.
I agree.
Tony, there are a lot of people that can claim to be, but there is only one World Heavyweight Champion, Ric Flair, the Nature Boy Ric Flair.
A man who wears the 10 pounds of gold, David. You're right, he is something. Nature Boy Ric Flair, the heavyweight champion of the world. Right now, let's go to Nature Boy Ric Flair to talk with the world's heavyweight champion.
Atlanta has been starved for the sight of a real man. Commitments all over the world have kept me from being in Atlanta. As much as Atlanta deserves a real man like Ric Flair. Who are you talking to? All you young ladies that are headed for Florida, you don't have to go to Disney World to find Space Mountain. It's right here. You pay attention, sweetheart, or you'll never get in line. The people stand in line because they're going to have an opportunity to see the greatest wrestler in all of professional sports.
Long limousine, just like that. Jet airplanes, just like that. Custom made clothes, just like that. And any woman in the world I want, just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that.
The list is endless of all the big guns that want to be where I am. They want to wear the custom-made clothes. They want to ride around in long limousines. They want to woo the finest women in the world today. Well, gentlemen, you remember one thing. Ric Flair is forever, and so is NWA.
Long limousine, just like that. Jet airplanes, just like that. Custom-made clothes, just like that. And any woman in the world I want, just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that.
Woo! Looking so fine. Show them what's cooking in Atlanta, GA tonight.
Just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that.
Woo! Looking so fine.
Just like that.
Well, it's not fair.
That's not fair for Flair.
No, it's... let's start a campaign.
Not fair for Flair. With that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to
everybody,
action.
everybody. Not
The
fair
Anvil
for Flair.
Jim Neidhart
Come on,
squaring
Randy,
off
not
against
fair
the
for
Mountain.
Flair. Not fair for Flair.
Get ready. You're talking to the Rolex wearing, diamond ring wearing, gift stealing, wheeling dealing, limousine black, jet flying, none of them again. And I'm having a hard time holding these alligators down.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to Flair, the second part in my 4-part mini-series here. And on this show, I'm flying solo, and I'm doing something a little bit unusual, something that I don't think many people have ever done in podcast form, and that is I want to take a look at Flair as a promo, and I want to actually take individual promos and sustain them to something approaching literary analysis. And I, as some people would know, am fairly well equipped to provide such analysis. And rather than take Flair's greatest hits, I thought it would be interesting to just take him over a period of time. And the period I've picked here is basically his WWF run from late 91 to 1992, and I want to take us from his debut until roughly the point that he loses the WWF title at WrestleMania 8. I think that gives us a really nice little picture of how Flair was able to come in to a new promotion, to a set of fans who didn't necessarily know him, although some portion of fans would have known him. And I really want to track exactly how he was able to build interest in him and himself as a character through a series of promos. So without further ado, we're going to go to WWF Superstars and one Sean Mooney on September the 9th, 1991 for the debut of Ric Flair.
Federation. Ric Flair, I will not contest the fact that you are known to be one of the greatest wrestlers in the world. But in the process of arriving here in the World Wrestling Federation, you have incurred the wrath of not only Rowdy Roddy Piper, but the World Wrestling Federation champion, Hulk Hogan. Are you ready to take on either of these superstars?
Recognized as one of the best wrestlers in the world? Is that the way you introduced me?
Well, yes, I would agree with that statement.
Well, why don't we start from the top? First of all, several months ago, the greatest mind in this sport. My close friend, Bobby Heenan, and I put together what you might call the winning package. Heenan, Flair, world champion, greatest mind. And we decided that if the money was right, that Ric Flair, instead of hollering to get in the doors of the WWF, ought to take that huge step and stand right in front of the doors, knock as hard as he could, and challenge the man that you all recognize as the World Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion. Well, Hulk Hogan, I'll get to you in a minute. First of all, let me get to a guy by the name of Roddy Piper. Because, Piper, before I get wound up on Hogan, you and I got a little short bit of business to take care of. In my absence, the greatest mind in our sport brought my World Heavyweight Championship trophy out on national television. Not to be braggadocious, not to show off, but merely to let the world know that the real world's heavyweight champion was going to be coming to the WWF. Well, lo and behold, did you think it wasn't going to happen? Did you think the greatest mind in this sport would walk out here with $75,000 worth of pure gold and blow smoke? Well, if you did, you were wrong. So, Roddy Piper, when you took off those earphones and walked from behind that desk with your cute little skirt on and walked over and spit on this and grabbed him, you put yourself in permanent retirement. Because now, Piper, you got to wrestle the real world heavyweight champion. And if you're honest with yourself, you know, Piper, what the real deal is all about.
What are you going to do the first time you see Mr. Piper?
Whack! Right across the face! I'm going to hit you so hard, Piper, your skirt's going to fall to your ankles. And then what are you going to do? Who are you going to spit on laying on your back, Hot Rod? Now.
Excuse me, Eric. I think you should mention about how many times, how many years you challenged Hulk Hogan.
Well,
unanswered.
For 10 years, it's been two names, Hogan and Flair. Hogan, the WWF champion, Ric Flair, the real world heavyweight champion. Well, now,
they don't know any better. They will.
Now, let's bring this down to something that Hogan will have to understand. You don't ignore this. My name's Ric Flair, and I'm going to burst that bubble, big man. And henceforth, big man, Hogan, wherever you walk, in any major airport, in any department store, in any hotel lobby, the question is going to be in your face from everyone. Can you beat Ric Flair? You're going to have to wrestle him, Hulk. I mean, Hulk, you're our hero. You're the man. And Hogan, that's when you're going to have to look inside. You're going to have to say to yourself, well, yeah, am I? I don't know. Well, I know. I'm Ric Flair. And I'm the real world champion. I know. How about that, brain? I guess what I'm saying is, Hogan, put up or shut up. Give me the belt. Walk away. Nobody gets hurt. Or what? You got a problem with that, sweetheart? I'll show you what I'm about later on. You keep tight right there. Yeah. It's as simple as that, Hulk. Show us what you got, big man.
A very intense Ric Flair. The challenge issued. Let's get back to action. The Texas Tornado taking on IRS.
So in this promo, you can see that Flair immediately is able to get himself over as this all-time great. This isn't just any kind of typical WWF heel coming in. He's immediately claiming to be the best of all time. The very first thing he says to Sean Mooney is, one of the best, as if to say, of course, I am the best. Then, very quickly, he turns his attention to Bobby Heenan. Now, of course, WF fans would have known Heenan for the past decade, and he puts Heenan over massively as the greatest mind in this sport. And he puts over the idea of himself and Heenan as this winning package. So immediately, he's getting over the concept of them as a team. He's getting Heenan over. He's getting himself over. He's getting a rub from Heenan. From anyone who, to any fans that don't know him. And I do think that it is possible that there were, especially younger fans, who just didn't have any idea that who Ric Flair was. And certainly I remember as a kid, in the UK, where most people didn't watch WCW or just didn't have access. Certainly most of us didn't have access to NWA in the 80s. That would have been the first time that many of us would have ever seen Ric Flair. Okay, and immediately he's over, not only as through the association with Heenan, but as an all-time great, the winning package, and so on and so forth. Now he turns his attention to Roddy Piper, which is obviously going to be someone he was setting up to have a series of matches with on house shows, and immediately, what does he get over? The title, the belt. He's brought the real world title, which of course any of us wrestling fans know is the NWA title and the great rival of the WWF for the past decade. He's brought that over, and he's getting it over immediately to fans, that, that's the thing that matters to him. Piper has spat on the belt, and he takes that as a, he's going to stop at nothing to get back at Piper. He says, I'm going to hit you so hard that your skirt is going to be around your ankles. But at the same time, to anybody who has seen NWA or anybody who was following WCW at this time, he's getting over that idea of WWF versus NWA, and that's the subtext of this whole thing. So there's a wonderful kind of worked shoot element running through this whole angle. And then, of course, he turns his attention to Hulk Hogan. And note, he doesn't actually run Hogan down. He puts him over as the WWF champion and a hero. And this is something that Ric Flair is phenomenal at throughout his career. It's why, for my money, he is the all-time best promo. People will look at The Rock, for example, but I actually think The Rock was guilty at times at making his opponent look foolish or putting them down. We love The Rock because he's just cool and charismatic, and has got killer lines. But I don't. If you actually think about selling a program, I think Flair, in terms of getting himself and his opponent over, is the all-time greatest. And here he comes in, he puts. He actually says, "You're a hero, you're the man." And if anybody knows Ric Flair, for him to call somebody else the man is really putting him over pretty strong. But then he develops this metaphor, which we'll touch on in the next promo, of bursting Hogan's bubble. And he's talking about the WWF bubble. And there's this real sense where he's trying to get inside Hogan's mind. Wherever you walk, in any major airport, in any department store or hotel lobby, you're going to have people asking you, when are you going to take on Ric Flair? So really, there's Flair the psychologist here, getting in Hogan's head, and in in 1 or 2 minutes, he's getting over the entire rivalry here. He's setting himself up as being an all-time great. There's an awesome little shades of the 80s Slick Rick character, because of course in the WWF, Flair would typically just wear the robe. You wouldn't see him in the shades and the suit, but you get these little snippets of Slick Rick, and a woman shouts something in the crowd, and you get the awesome little aside to her of you can see the 80s character come out there. So wonderful debut for Flair. Now his next appearance would be in 2 weeks' time, September the 21st, 91, and this was his appearance on the Funeral Parlor on Superstars. Get ready for this one, folks.
Piper, if you want to do any spitting, here's the real world champion, Ric Flair.
I'll be right back. Now just keep your cool, Hot Rod. Just keep your cool, please. Be a professional. I'm trying.
What did you think? Piper, what happened? I would just go away. Wrong. Now, you, like everybody else, has got to deal with the real world heavyweight champion. And Piper, let's get it straight right now. The first opportunity I have to see you what? Lights out, boy.
Oh, yeah.
Lights out. Now, let's talk about Hulk Hogan. For 10 years, Hogan, Ric Flair has called your name from every spot in the world. And you know what? You never called back. You never had the guts to jump back at Ric Flair. So now, Hogan, it goes like this. The greatest mind in this sport made the phone call. And I said, Rain, if you got the money, honey, I got the time. So here we are. We're outside this big glass bubble that you live in, Hogan, called the WWF. But can you hear me knocking, Hogan? It's Ric Flair, the real world heavyweight champion, the greatest wrestler alive today. Let me say one thing, and I want you to pay real close attention. While you were in Hollywood making movies, Thunder Lips, I was winning world titles. I bled and I sweat and I paid the price to be the real world heavyweight champion. And the difference between you and me is this, big man. For all those little kids out there that you live every day to make happy, there's 1,000 women that love a kiss stealing, wheeling dealing, limousine riding, jet flying, son of a gun that just happens to be the real world heavyweight champion.
Well, there you have it, Hot Rod. He calls himself the real world champion. Ric Flair, I compliment you on keeping your cool.
So for my money, this is one of the all-time great promos that isn't really talked about. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I'd have to put this promo in, maybe a top 5 of all time. I just think it's absolutely phenomenal. He hits so many brilliant points here. Some of the lines are just incredible. And today, in today's wrestling, you just don't see or hear promos as great as this. So I'm just going to go through line by line what he says and stop to comment on different things here. Okay, he says, for 10 years, Hogan, Ric Flair has called your name from every spot in the world, and immediately you know that he's telling the truth. You know that Ric Flair has been going all over the world, and you know that it's been on his mind at least. When is he going to face Hulk Hogan? Okay, and then he calls Hogan out, and you know what? You never had the guts to call back. So immediately Flair is putting himself in the position of being the wronged party, which is a classic heel move. Of course, he's accusing Hogan of being a coward, and Flair is the one who's been wanting the shot. Then he puts Heenan over again. The greatest mind made the phone call. And then, in a wonderful callback to his days talking with Tony Schiavone on World Championship Wrestling, you got the money, honey, I got the time. So a great little one of Ric Flair's little catchphrases there. And then, back to this metaphor, we're outside this big glass bubble that you live in, Hogan, called the WWF. and there, he's not only getting at Hogan, he's getting at the entire promotion of the WWF. He's getting at the fact that the WWF never acknowledged wrestling outside of the WWF bubble, and he, Flair, is invading this space. He is wrestling. He represents wrestling outside of the WWF, and he's coming into Hogan's territory here. And he says, "Can you hear me knocking, Hogan? Can you hear me knocking?" And I think it's a really vivid imagery. It's almost like poetry. This, and then check out this line: "While you were in Hollywood making movies, Thunderlips, I was winning world titles. I paid the price. I bled and I sweat to be the real world heavyweight champion." Now, that is such a phenomenal line there, because I mean, I guess these days you'd call it a worked shoot, because so much of what he's saying here is actually true, and because of that there's a real verisimilitude to it all. It's actually believable what he's saying, and he encapsulates a dynamic between these two men. Hogan is all about Hollywood. Hogan did go off and make movies. He did bugger off and stop wrestling. And fans who are actually thinking about this would know. And Flair was bleeding and, you know, sweating and working his arse off all around the world. So there's this little dynamic here that anybody who's followed Flair to the WWF, any of those fans in the South, for example, who are watching this, even though Flair is being presented as the heel, even though he's being booed in the studio, even though this is Hogan's universe, any actual Ric Flair fans following this, you know, would be also invested in this feud. There is no sense in which any fan is being alienated. The true hardcores are going to be in Flair's corner here, and he is speaking directly to them, while at the same time, any Died in the World WWF fans, any Hogan fans are going to be rooting for Hogan. And then check out this line: "This is the difference between you and me, big man," he says. "This is the difference between me and you. For all you little kids out there that you live every day of your life to make happy, there's 1,000 women that love a kiss stealing, wheeling dealing, jet flying son of a gun who just happens to be the real world's heavyweight champion." Now, not only are we getting another callback to one of Flair's kind of 80s catchphrases, so we're getting that Slick Rick character sneaking in yet again. Not only do we get that, but he's making reference to the fact that Hogan is there for the kids, and he is there for the adults, the women who want to screw him, the men who want to be like him. So you're having Flair talking to these two different audiences, which we know now are two different wrestling audiences, and he's tapping into both of them. I think it's a genius promo, top 5 of all time for me, doesn't get talked about enough, and the fact that this isn't flagged up as Ric Flair's greatest promo is testament to the fact that he is one of the greatest promos of all time. So now, one day later, we're going to go to WWF Challenge and the Barbershop, where Flair had this to say.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Brutus, the Barber, Big J!
Welcome to the barbershop. I guess this league is on his way, and he claims he's the real world champion. He's Ric Flair.
No. You introduce him properly, or you don't have an interview. You make the decision.
Well, you're so smart, Weasel. You do it.
Just sit down and take a load off your face. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure at this time to introduce the real world heavyweight champion, the greatest of them all. Let's hear it for Ric Flair. It don't get any better than this.
Federation heavyweight champion, where Roddy Piper claims to be the baddest apple on the street. Am I right?
You're right.
Well, boys, meet the real world heavyweight wrestling champion, Ric Flair. Because now I'm at your doorstep. For 8 years, Hogan, I've hollered to you, come on, Hulk, let's find out who's the man, you or me. And then Roddy Piper makes the mistake of crossing that fine line, grabbing the brain, spitting on the belt. Well, Piper, you know, the first time we hook up, well, you're done. And then Hogan, wherever you are, Hogan, listen to me very carefully. There are 300 million people in the world that think the sun rises and sets on you. They think you are the champion. Little kids all over the world say, Hulk Hogan this and Hulk Hogan that. Well, Hogan, I'm right here, and I'm telling you that until you beat Ric Flair, you're second best. I am the real world heavyweight champion.
So the genius of this promo and of this series of promos really is that he's hyping two different programs at the same time. Hogan is clearly the headline feud, but Piper is going to be working the house show. So Flair devotes more time to Hogan, but is always making sure that he's getting his shots in on Piper. And just look, he's reiterating the same points as the promo the night before, but he's changing up all of his metaphors now. So before, where he was talking about knocking on the glass bubble, here he's talking about being on Hogan's doorstep. He's literally out, he's literally on his doorstep. Hogan's got nowhere to go. But then, look at how massively he puts Hogan over. He says 300 million people in the world think the sun rises and sets on you. They think you are the champion. Little kids all over the world say Hulk Hogan this and Hulk Hogan that. He couldn't be putting Hogan over any more massively than this. Okay? He's literally building Hogan up in order to pull him down by saying, I'm telling you that until you beat Ric Flair, you're second best. So it kind of, by building Hogan up, he builds himself up even more. And that I think is one of the underrated aspects of Ric Flair's promos, the extent to which he's able to make his opponent even as he's talking up how he's going to beat that opponent. So yet another really good promo. So the next Flair promo I'm going to be looking at is going to be October the 6th, 1991 on Superstars. And this was where he was hyping up a forthcoming match at the Boston Gardens against Roddy Piper.
Well, then it's time for you folks here in Boston to start preparing for a major event on the way to the Boston Gardens Sunday night, November 10th. Now, that night, it all starts at 7:30 p.m., and in the main event, you are going to see an explosive encounter. Last week, Ric Flair made it very clear he will use whatever tactic is necessary to get his message out here in the WWF. And no one knows that better than Roddy Piper. The two superstars will collide at the Garden head-on. And right now, Ric Flair is standing by with his advisor, Bobby Heenan.
Piper is probably one of the most vicious men in the World Wrestling Federation. He's probably one of the most unpredictable wrestlers in the World Wrestling Federation. He's a punk. He's a street kid. He fought his way to the top in this great sport. Why? Because he had it here. He's got intestinal fortitude. But you didn't show me anything, Piper, when you were laying face down and your mini skirt up over your head. Compliments of the real world's champion. Now what are you going to do, Piper? Nothing.
The match is signed, Piper. And let's give it where it belongs. You were one of the biggest stars to ever walk that long aisle in this sport. Now, my friend, the real world heavyweight champion is on the scene. And if you want to be somebody, you got to beat me. And my friend, I'm saying it can't be done. Woo!
So this is just a short little promo hyping up his forthcoming match at the Boston Gardens. I included Heenan's promo there because it's actually a nice little callback to the days of the Grand Wizard. There's something gloriously old school about this one. You know, the WWF had been running promos like this since the 70s, so awesome to see these guys do it here in 1991. Here Flair does put over Piper huge yet again. You know, you were one of the biggest stars to walk that long line in the sport. Now, he's not saying that Piper is a has-been. He's saying, if you follow the logic, that Piper was one of the biggest stars until Flair showed up. So now, Piper, even though he is still a big star ultimately, needs to prove himself again by beating Flair. You know, you can't actually be claimed to be one of the biggest stars until you've gone up against the real world champion. So this is just a genius little bit of hype for a house show. That's all it is, a little promo. But just think about how many of those little insert promos you've seen in WWF and how many of them are utterly forgettable. And here, in 1 minute, Ric Flair has sold you on wanting to come to the Boston Gardens to see that match. So, yet another great promo. And the next promo is also promoting that Boston Garden show. This is from Challenge on October the 13th.
Rowdy Roddy Piper, out for revenge. He takes on the so-called real champion of the world, Ric Flair.
You know, the word's out that Rowdy Roddy Piper is mad. He's boiling mad. And everybody says, what's going to happen when he gets his hands on you? The only thing your hands are going to be good for, pal, is using a bagpipe to vacuum the living room rug.
You know, Piper, they've always said Roddy Piper was a real bad apple. One of the toughest wrestlers to ever walk that immortal aisle. Well, Piper, I'd say you've been in Hollywood too long, and you've been at that desk too long. And now, buddy, you got to jump on Ric Flair, the real world's heavyweight champion. Woo!
So here he says, Piper, you've been in Hollywood too long, you've been at that desk too long. And again, he's doing a bit of the work shoot stuff here, you know. He's calling Piper out basically, telling him to up his game and to prove himself. He's sowing those seeds of doubt in the minds of the fans, and he's putting question marks on Piper's ability, and basically giving fans every possible reason to pay their money and turn up to Boston Gardens to see what happens. I think it's a great little insert promo. Awesome to hear Sean Mooney there as well. And this is the third promo now from Boston. This is October the 20th, 1991. WF Challenge, once again introduced by Sean Mooney. And the last promo on Piper hyping this Boston bout.
Hello, everyone. Fall has arrived. Clear evidence is the distinct chill in the air. Well, right here in the World Wrestling Federation, since his arrival, Ric Flair has received a very chilly reception wherever he goes. Well, Sunday night, November 10th, 3 weeks from this Sunday evening at the Boston Garden, Rowdy Roddy Piper plans to heat things up when he steps into the ring with the so-called real champion of the world. Let's hear from both superstars involved in this incredible matchup.
Hey, Hot Rod, if you've shook all the cobwebs out of your head, listen to this.
Hey, Piper, the first time you saw the belt, you spit on it. The last time you saw it, you kissed it. Now, big man, if you want more, I'm real easy to find. You see, I'm looking like this, Piper. My name's Ric Flair, and I'm the real world heavyweight champion. If you or anybody else wants to do something about that claim, buddy, I'm not hard to find. So come on, Hot Rod, come on down and jump on the real world champion. Woo!
So here he's coming back to the plot points of the feud. Piper spat on the belt. Flair got his payback by, he says he kissed it. He's talking about whacking Piper with the belt, of course, as he did. This is a classic Ric Flair delivery here, back to his real 80s style of cutting a promo. I mean, it's simple stuff. He's not saying anything too mind-blowing here. He's just calling Piper out, challenging him to prove himself. You know, I was sold 2 weeks ago. Let's see you in Boston already, guys. You've got my money. So the next one is yet another little insert promo. This time taking on Piper at MSG. So this is to promote a match with Piper at MSG from October the 26th.
Also in the main event, you are going to see a muy caliente matchup. It is the so-called real champion of the world, Ric Flair, facing Roddy Piper. Right now, both sides are standing by with more on this explosive encounter.
This Monday night at Madison Square Garden, New York City will never be the same. What you gonna do, Roddy Piper, when Ric Flair runs wild on you?
Hey, that's a catchy phrase.
Not bad, huh, Bobby the Brain? I'll tell you what, Piper, you'll do nothing. Because I'm Ric Flair, I'm the real world champion. I'm the very best there is. The first time you saw the belt, you spit on it. The next time, whap, you kissed it. You don't like that? Do something about it. Bright lights, big cities, pretty ladies, long limousines, the Big Apple, Madison Square Garden, Monday night. Hot Rod, come on down.
This Monday night.
Woo! Woo!
Again, just a short one, and he doesn't have a lot of time here, and he has to share that time with Heenan, but he hits all the spots, mentions Piper spitting on the belt, gets in his character stuff about the limousines and the women, puts over New York and MSG huge. I mean, you know, even though it was only 30 seconds and it was a little snippet, I'd still want to be there just listening to this. So Flair, even phenomenal when he's only got 20 or 30 seconds. So we're going to fast forward now to January the 11th, 1992. Obviously, over the fall and the winter months, you know, Flair would be working those house shows. I mean, there are a few other promos and things hyping those matches with Hogan and Piper, but I thought I'd go ahead a little bit to the next chapter, as it were, and. This is a promo to a couple of weeks before the Royal Rumble on the Funeral Parlor, WWF Superstars.
Conviction there. We introduced the real world champion, Ric Flair.
Welcome, gentlemen. Welcome into my parlor. The clock is ticking down. It won't be long before the Royal Rumble. And you know, my Undertaker's in the Royal Rumble, too.
Your Undertaker may be big. He may be from the dark side. But there's two things he's not. One is he's not perfect, and the other is he's not the real world champion.
Woo! What we're talking about now is the destiny of Hulk Hogan, not the WWF title. Look at it from my point of view. WWF Championship is secondary to the main mission in my life right now, and that is to the total disgrace, the head bowing of Hulk Hogan. Look at it like this. of all time at my side, Mr. Perfect. And we all know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I'm already going to the Hall of Fame. So the Royal Rumble, the most difficult match in all of professional wrestling, yes, but when you have nothing to lose, and you know that everybody worldwide, whether they like it or don't like it, will have to say, when I win the WWF title, that I am the greatest of all time. Jack Tunney, video distort my title now. But when I hold that WWF title in front of that television camera, when I'm the champion, the whole world will stand up. They'll have no choice but to say, it's Mr. Perfect, and it's the real world champion. It's notoriety, it's more money than any of you out there will ever know. And it's being able to say that you are number one. Hulk Hogan, you, for the rest of your natural born life, will have to walk the face of this earth as number two. No. As number three. As number three.
Man, what a promo that was. What was it about the funeral parlor that brought out the awesomeness in Flair's promo at this time? So here, of course, Heenan and Flair have brought in Mr. Perfect as the executive consultant so that Heenan can stay in the commentary booth. And what a promo this is. I mean, he's not forgotten Hogan here. He's focused entirely on destroying him. Not only that, he wants to disgrace him. He wants to... what does he say? He wants the total head bowing of Hulk Hogan. He wants to bow his head. He puts Mr. Perfect over huge as the greatest ring technician of all time. And he correctly predicts that he himself, Ric Flair, is bound for the Hall of Fame. I mean, he couldn't have got that more right. He got in twice. Was the Hall of Fame even up and running in 92? Probably not. In fact, 94 was the first one, wasn't it? Just a little retrospective thing, funny to look back on. But anyway, in this promo, you get a real sense of Flair as this kind of maniacal, sadistic, insane megalomaniac. You know, the levels of grandeur and delusion are off the charts, and at the crescendo he even gives off that evil laughter. And he's saying that Hulk Hogan will have to live out the rest of his days as second best, and then Perfect pipes in as third best. And you know, he sees winning the title as the world listening. So underlying all of this, you can tell that the Ric Flair character craves acceptance and external validation above everything else. He's not going to accept, he's not going to stop until everybody recognizes and accepts him as being the real world champion. And that recognition from everybody else is really important to him. And that's why the belt is important, because it represents that external validation. So a really neat little insight into the basic psychology of the Ric Flair character in this promo. And I think it, you know, sets up what happens at the Royal Rumble absolutely perfectly. So we have one more promo just before the Royal Rumble. This is on Superstars the night before. It's January the 18th, 92. Let's listen to this one.
And folks, this is definitely an evening you want to spend with a loved one. It is Valentine's Day, but guaranteed there will be no love lost in the main event between Rowdy Roddy Piper and Ric Flair. Right now, both men are standing by with more on this upcoming battle.
You know, champ, I can feel it in the air. The Royal Rumble, the World Wrestling Federation belt is on the line. It will be yours, champ. And the Intercontinental belt is also on the line. And you know what? Our friend, so-called friend, Rowdy Piper, he's got an opportunity of a lifetime.
I had a dream, he said. I dreamt when I was 160 pounds that I was going to be the world champion. Wrong! The difference between you, Piper, and me and Perfect is we had a dream, but we went out and did it. We became the greatest champions known to this sport. And now, at the Royal Rumble, Piper, you got a shot at the Intercontinental title and a shot at the Royal Rumble. Well, my friend, those are called illusions of grandeur. Look at the new WWF champ.
So here, as his own character is becoming more and more hysterical and more delusional, he pulls the classic heel move of calling Piper out for illusions of grandeur. So, I mean, Flair, the person most guilty of illusions of grandeur, or delusions of grandeur if you want, is now calling Piper out for exactly that. So, always awesome when a heel is, completely hypocritical in that way. And then he lands some blows that must have hurt Piper, in that work shoot style. He references the fact that him and Perfect have won lots of titles between them, an oblique reference to Mr. Perfect's AWA world titles, of course, all of Flair's NWA titles, Perfect's IC title, and the Piper hasn't won any titles at all. So he's calling it like it is, but he's doing it in a way that is going to generate maximum heat, maximum sympathy for Piper, maximum heat and interest in the Royal Rumble itself. And then he's so confident of the victory that he's already calling himself the WWF champion. So such a perfectly booked angle, all of this, culminating last week. He focused the promo on Hogan. This week he's focusing it on Piper, who he's been feuding with, and none of this angle could have been as executed as well as it was without all of these promos that I've been running through. So let's go to the Royal Rumble itself now, and I'm going to take a look at the promo directly after he won the world title. This is January the 19th, 92.
All right, by virtue of winning the Royal Rumble, we have a brand new World Wrestling Federation champion as the press watches on. At this time, to present the title belt to the new champion, our president, the distinguished Jack Tunney.
Congratulations, Ric Flair, on becoming the undisputed champion of the World Wrestling Federation.
Let me just say, after View distorting the belt to proclaim me the real world champion, I'm going to tell you all, with a tear in my eye, this is the greatest moment in my life. When you walk around this world and you tell everybody you're number one, the only way you get to stay number one is to be number one. And this is the only title in the wrestling world that makes you number one. When you are the king of the WWF, you rule the world. Think about it like that, Mr. Perfect.
Guys, hold on up there.
Woo!
We did it! Let's give a big one! Woo! You did it! I was never so impressed with anything I've ever seen in all my life. He went out there for over 60 minutes, never took a back step, took it to Hogan, took it to The Undertaker, took it to whoever got in that ring. That's why he is,
hey,
and
Bobby,
you can call him now, the real world's heavyweight champion.
We're not the kind of guys that say, we told you so, but we told you so.
Okay, very good. Ric Flair, you have made put that cigarette out. You have made World Wrestling Federation history here tonight.
It's the greatest moment of my life. I want to jump. I want to party. But I got to tell you like this. For the Hulk Hogans and the Macho Mans and the Pipers and the Sids, now it's Ric Flair. And y'all pay homage to the man. Woo!
And so there it is, the external validation he's been craving so much from, and he gets it from Jack Tunney himself, representing the man, giving, as in the corporate man, giving him the title, the external validation he's been craving. And then, such a classic line, he says, with a tear in my eye, this is the greatest moment in my life. Why? Because he's proved that he's number one. And then, in an amazing heel move, after months of claiming to be the real world champion with the NWA belt, he flips it and says that this is the only title in the wrestling world that makes you number one. And then, listen to this, when you are the king of the WWF, you rule the world. He puts himself over, he puts the title over, he puts the WWF, the company, over. It's just a phenomenal promo in every single way. And then, Heenan and Perfect are absolutely great in their support roles as well. You know, creating that atmosphere of the heel champion victory. I mean, it's a perfectly executed moment. We get the classic Mean Gene moment as well. Put that cigarette out, he says. But Flair being Flair, he doesn't forget the rivals. You know, he calls them out by name: Piper, Hogan, Sid, Savage. You all pay homage to the man now. So it's kind of like back in the 80s he did it. He would always do the roll call of all of the top faces in the company. And here we get it again. So he's already set up, his first few title defenses, and as a wrestling fan, I couldn't be more excited. So anyway, I'm going to fast forward again now to the kind of Angle feud match where he would lose this first WWF title, and I want to go to about a month before the WrestleMania 8 to March the 7th, 1992, where he cut this promo on Randy Savage, and this is a famous one.
There has been tremendous speculation in recent weeks that Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect know something about the Macho Man, Randy Savage, that would adversely affect his performance when he challenges Flair for the World Wrestling Federation title as part of WrestleMania 8. I'm looking forward to it. Oh, Mr. Perfect, come on along with us if you would, please. Wow. Look at this layout. I can't believe it.
When I tell you I love you, honey, you can put it in the bank.
Interrupting. I didn't mean to do that. I don't want you to cut your telephone call short. Gentlemen, I got to say, this wall looks very impressive. Matter of fact, it looks like the who's who in the world.
Well, it's the Wall of Fame, Gene.
Mr. Perfect, and of course you, World Wrestling Federation champion Ric Flair, you know very well why I am here. The allegations, the questions, the accusations, I want some answers.
Well, Gene, the whole world knows, it's no secret, that Randy Savage is insanely jealous of Elizabeth. But I'll tell you what has been the best-kept secret in all of professional sports, and that's this. Would you please tell the whole world, Gene, what this is?
If I'm not mistaken, it looks to me like a cover of an upcoming issue of the World Wrestling Federation magazine.
Oh, it's more than that, Gene. Please read the top line.
Wait a minute. Extra. Flair reveals shocking Elizabeth photos. Hey, what does that mean?
I'll tell you what it means. It means that somewhere out there in the world, Randy and Liz are vacationing as Randy prepares for his greatest challenge, WrestleMania 8. A shot at the World Wrestling Federation Championship. And it means at this very moment, Randy and Liz are either sitting opposite each other, maybe even lying down side by side. And it means that Elizabeth right now is experiencing sweaty palms. Right, Liz, baby? Maybe she's experiencing that old-time feeling up and down her spine. Maybe she's finding it more and more difficult, eh, baby, to look Randy in the eye. Do you know why she's having all these problems right now, Gene? Because she knows that Ric Flair is not only the greatest wrestler alive today, she knows that Ric Flair is the greatest lover on the face of God's green earth, Gene. And you know how she knows that? I bet you want to know, huh? You're thinking to yourself, champ, can you prove that statement? Well, the answer is yes. Let me show you this right here, everybody.
Oh,
Once again, look at this, Gene Okerlund. Look at this, everyone. Woo! You know what this means? It means Randy Savage Elizabeth was mine before she was yours. Woo! Yes! One more time, Randy. It means Elizabeth was mine, big man, before she was yours. And yes, if you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to follow that act? You can't. I'm the best, number one. But you know what the bottom line is right here, Randy? The bottom line is that the only reason Elizabeth is at your side right now is because I dumped her. Yeah, I dumped her. She's damaged goods, Randy. She's been mine. How about that, Randy? Is that hard to swallow?
That's cold.
Oh, yeah, it should be cold. And it should make you really think hard. Look her in the eyes. Ask her as you focus on WrestleMania 8, as you focus on your greatest challenge, Ric Flair. Remember, she was mine, pal, before she was yours. And Liz, I know you're thinking, baby, you're dying to make the call. I know you got the number, and she does, Gene. So, baby, feel free. Make the call. Drop the dime. I'll be there 24 hours a day, just like I always have been, honey. You know, as we look at this, I want to assure you of one thing. And keep in mind, she's a beauty, isn't she? Let me assure you of one thing, Gene Okerlund.
What's that?
She's all the way live. The water was a little cold. Woo, what a night.
Hey, Jeff, was she a woo?
Oh, no, she was a woo!
What I love there, you get the little snippet of him talking to the woman out the back there. You know, Flair's such a player that he's constantly got some woman on the go. And Mr. Perfect is so good as the kind of jock sidekick as well during all of this. Now, of course, this is a famous angle. Flair has got shocking photos of Elizabeth, investigative journalist Mean Gene on the scene. And Flair here, he says, Elizabeth knows that Ric Flair is not only the greatest wrestler alive today, she knows that Ric Flair is the greatest lover on the face of God's green earth. Elizabeth was mine before she was yours, Savage. I mean, this is sailing close to the wind, I think. You know, Flair is outright claiming that he slept with Savage's wife, but also that he's better in bed. So not only has he slept with Savage's wife, he is just much better in bed. And then that he was there before Savage and that he dumped her and that she's damaged goods, and that essentially he's saying that Savage has Flair's sloppy seconds. Now, you know, the stuff with Hogan that I covered earlier on in this show was quite risque for the time, but I mean, if you think about this, you know, the thing about Ric Flair is that he was so demonstrably adult. You know, he's such an adult act, and you know, let's face it, the WWF at this time was a kiddie promotion. It was, you know, a cartoon world, and Flair is kind of bringing this adult content, kicking and screaming into the kiddie promotion. I think it's amazing stuff, and Flair, of course, is great in this role. I mean, if you think about what he's saying here, he's openly bragging about his ability to make Miss Elizabeth come. I mean, let's face it, that's what he's suggesting. Can you believe that this went out on WWF programming in 1992? I mean, it's just so great. So great. And if you also just think about how jealous and insane Savage is, and how much just watching this would rile him up. I mean, it's just absolutely, it's all-time great stuff. I really love this run in 92, is why I'm covering it. I couldn't love some of these promos more. Now, I'm fast-forwarding now a couple of weeks again to look at a press conference ahead of WrestleMania 8 that was held on this is the 28th of March 28th, 1992, a week before WrestleMania.
Could I get your attention, please? Before we get started here tonight, I would like to set some ground rules down for everybody, members of the dais as well. And the ground rules are this, that I would like all the applause to be held till after Ric Flair has finished speaking. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I would like to introduce to you the man that in 1 week at WrestleMania 8 will face the Macho Man Randy Savage, and I am proud to say will destroy the Macho Man Randy Savage. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you at this time the greatest World Wrestling Federation champion of all time, Ric Flair.
Thank you, Mr. Perfect. As I now stand before each and every one of you that believes Elizabeth led that life of celibacy, each and every one of you that believes she's that sweet, innocent flower she claims to be, each and every one of you that believes her accusations that the photographs of she and I are not real. Once again, as I stand before you all, let's just take one moment to review the photos. Let's start out with the photo of she and I by the pool. Remember the towels? The initials R and L? Well, what else could they stand for but Rick and Liz? And my favorite fruit, strawberries. What a great day that was. Now let's look at Liz and I watching TV, cuddled up oh so closely. And of course there's the scene at the dining room table, drinking Dom Perignon. Look at the look of her eyes, look at the bliss of there's a satisfied woman. And of course, let's go to the stables. As I said earlier, there's Elizabeth with her 2 favorite studs. Please notice the scarf she's wearing. Well, it's not by chance, ladies and gentlemen, that I happen to have that lovely scarf with me this very moment. And it's not by chance that I happen to remember the lovely scent of Elizabeth, Randy, the lovely scent of your oh so beautiful wife. Then again, it's not by chance that I'll be wearing this same scarf at WrestleMania 8, remembering the sweet smell of your lovely wife, Randy. And it's not by chance that I will experience the sweet smell of success when I beat you, Randy Savage, at WrestleMania 8. Woo! Thank you oh so much. Woo! Woo! Hey. Woo!
This deliberate taunting of the Macho Man and this scathing attack upon the pristine character of Elizabeth must be driving Randy Savage absolutely insane. Later on in this program, the Macho Man will be here with his very focused comments.
So, wonderfully staged press conference there by Perfect and Flair. It's awesome how kind of shady and dodgy these two guys are. Flair, of course, has got all of these different photos, and it's almost like some JFK shit going on here, where he's literally reviewing the evidence. Remember the initials R and L, Rick and Liz. Looks at the fruit, the strawberries, cuddling up, watching TV. And killer line, look at her eyes, there's a satisfied woman. And then he claims that he's going to wear this scarf to WrestleMania to remember her smell, and he's got the same scarf that she's wearing in the photos. What's awesome about this is that of course there's every we the fans don't know if Liz is, all of the goodies you heard Sir Alfred say afterwards, the pristine character of Elizabeth, and we're meant to think as babyface fans that Elizabeth hasn't done anything wrong, but obviously we don't know if the claims are true or not, and Rick, being such a ladies' man, could be telling the truth. So there's a little bit of intrigue, and more intrigue than usual, surrounding this match at WrestleMania. And after this press conference, we're ready to see it, of course. So let's move on to the final promo I'm going to look at, and that is, of course, the moment where he loses the title at WrestleMania 8. This is April the 5th, 92.
Well, thank you, Gorilla. This is one tough assignment. I'm going to attempt to get comments from the now former World Wrestling Federation champion, Ric Flair's executive...
Shut up, Mooney. This is the way it is. Macho Man Randy Savage, you call yourself a macho man? Well, what's so macho? What an injustice. I'm not going to stand out here and say anything that wasn't true, Macho Man. You had a handful of trunks. The trunks were up. The stupid referee, a bad job of officiating. I'll tell you, Bobby, you saw what happened. Did you see what happened?
I just got down from the booth. He had your tights. I saw it. It's on camera. It's on tape. I got it. There's nothing to worry about. He had
There is nothing to worry about. Wait a minute. There
I
were
know,
some tactics that Ric Flair was using out there that were questionable.
What we have right now is a man that'll walk around town tonight claiming to be the real world champion, claiming to be the second time WWE heavyweight champion. He'll be claiming it all. And most of all, he'll be claiming the love of that Jezebel, Elizabeth. Now, Savage, unlike a lot of people in the greatest sport of them all, we don't cry over spilt milk. We reassemble a team. The money, the brains, the nucleus, and we say to our opponent, you did it once. Now, let's see you do it again. One time means nothing to my career. Tell him, Mr. Perfect.
I'll tell you what, one time means nothing, Macho Man. Like your old lady, you're going to be damaged goods because this man has never taken a shortcut in the world of wrestling. You, Macho Man, have taken a shortcut. You had a handful of tights. We were out there, we were wrestling. This man was the greatest World Wrestling Federation champion of all time. Here it comes. Let everybody have a good long look at it because they're all going to see how the handful of tights.
Here
it comes.
Watch, Mooney, you get a good look. Look at that handful of tights. That's a champion. He cheated. He doesn't deserve to have the title.
Like his old lady, a cheater.
Well, the way it stands right now, there is a new champion in the WWE.
Now, we regroup together. Where I go, Perfect goes. It's all monitored by Heenan. And like I said before, Savage, might not be tomorrow. It might be the day after. But I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to beat you bad, and every time I see your old lady, I'm going to kiss her on those moist, wet lips.
Woo! Baby champ.
Well, as you know, this is not a very safe place to be. I'm out of here. Let's go over to Mean Gene Okerlund.
So, absolutely legendary promo, this. Heenan and Perfect in clear disarray, and Flair tries to remain calm at the start, but he's clearly seething, calls Elizabeth a Jezebel. Now, he's trying to tell this narrative of reassembling the team and reordering and starting again. He's trying to hold it all together, but you can hear him literally falling apart at the seams here. His pride is hurt. He's so sore over losing the title. There's little grunts. His breath is short. He's clearly beside himself, and yet he's trying to tell this narrative of not crying over spilt milk and, you know, holding it all together and regrouping with the perfect team and all this. But, you know, the kind of body language and his tone tells the real story. And then, of course, if it needed to be made explicit, Heenan and Perfect just exploding with anger tells a real story. And then comes the immortal line. One time means nothing to my career. What an amazing one-liner there. And I think that's another aspect of Flair's promos that I haven't really commented on, is his ability to create those sound bites, you know, those memorable lines that you can quote time and again. And then, of course, he gets in his shot at Elizabeth again, every time I'm going to see her, I'm going to kiss her on those moist, wet lips. And, just that word moist is overly sexual for the 1992 WF context. Absolutely phenomenal stuff from Flair. And I hope over the course of the past hour or so, or hour and a half maybe, that I have proven that Flair is the greatest promo of all time, just through his ability to tell a story, to craft feuds purely through his promos. And yes, I do acknowledge The Rock or Mick Foley or Steve Austin or even Vince himself, Dusty Rhodes, all of these people, Terry Funk as well, are great promos. They all have things that they do exceptionally well. What I think Ric Flair does well, and what I've tried to demonstrate here, is that he gets his opponent over, he gets the angle over, he gets the belt over, he gets the company over, he gets his allies over, he gets, he consistently got Heenan and Perfect over, and Piper over, and Hogan over, and Savage over, as well as getting himself over. And that is, I think, not only a lost art in current promos, but something that Ric Flair did better than anybody in wrestling history. Join me once again for part 3 of Fair for Flair, where I'll be back talking about some matches. Woo!
Tony, there are a lot of people that can claim to be, but there is only one World Heavyweight Champion, Ric Flair, the Nature Boy Ric Flair.
A man who wears the 10 pounds of gold, David. You're right, he is something. Nature Boy Ric Flair, the heavyweight champion of the world. Right now, let's go to Nature Boy Ric Flair in a talk with the world's heavyweight champion.
Atlanta has been starved for the sight of a real man. Commitments all over the world have kept me from being in Atlanta, as much as Atlanta deserves a real man like Ric Flair. Who are you talking to? All you young ladies that are headed for Florida, you don't have to go to Disney World to find Space Mountain. It's right here. You pay attention, sweetheart, or you'll never get in line. The people stand in line because they're going to have an opportunity to see the greatest wrestler in all of professional sports.
Long limousine, just like that. Jet airplanes, just like that. Custom made clothes, just like that. And any woman in the world I want, just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that.
The list is endless of all the big guns that want to be where I am. They want to wear the custom-made clothes. They want to ride around in long limousines. They want to woo the finest women in the world today. Well, gentlemen, you remember one thing. Ric Flair is forever, and so is NWA.
Long limousine, just like that. Jet airplanes, just like that. Custom made clothes, just like that. And any woman in the world I want, just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that.
Woo! Looking so fine. Show them what's cooking in Atlanta, GA tonight.
Just like that. Just like that. Just like that. Just like that.
Woo! Looking so fine.
Just like that.